Avery, whose show is this? And we're live. Welcome, everybody, here to the Lakers Lounge Podcast. I'm Anthony Irwin, Senior Lakers Insider for Clutch Points. And today on the show, we will be talking about Anthony Davis. I was, getting ready to, as we always do, and as everybody always does, getting ready to do our kind of year in review series. And that will be something that we go back to, especially on slow days. And I was trying to think of like most impactful people around the Lakers sphere. And, there's a lot of great nominees, right? You could say Rob Pelinka for pulling off the Luka Doncic trade. You could talk about LeBron James because he's LeBron James. You could talk about Luka for being the next franchise cornerstone here moving forward. But to me, the person who impacted everybody that I mentioned there, and on top of that, I thought played just about the best basketball of anybody who wore a Laker uniform this year. I got to go with Anthony Davis. So we're going to talk about the season that he had. I always like to reset with expectations going into the season, and kind of go from there, build from there. So we'll do that. We'll talk about AD's season. We'll talk about the Luka trade. We'll talk about the way that he has handled everything since, and then on top of it all, or after all of that, we will finish with a conversation about how AD will be remembered from here on out as a Laker, who I he's going to go down as one of my favorite Lakers. So yeah, let's get into it. Quick reminder, please do hit that subscribe button. Please hit that like button. Please hit that share button. If you guys are listening to this in the morning via pod, hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcasts, preferably on Odyssey, because I'm a company man. And then also tell your friends about the show. Tell your friends that you love the show. Tell your enemies that you hate it. And let's go ahead and dive on into Anthony Davis's season and the indelible impact that he had as a player, and then eventually as an unexpected trade asset. So let's start with expectations going into the season. And with Anthony Davis, the expectations are always through the roof. AD was coming off of a pretty good season last year. Frankly, a really good season last year. Previously, he played 76 games last season, averaged 35 and a half minutes per game last year, scored 27 or 24.7 points per game, and was frankly the Lakers' best player, and had finally, I think, stepped fully into that role as the Lakers' best player, even if he wasn't the kind of star of the Los Angeles Lakers. 24.7 points per game, 12 and a half rebounds per game, 3.5 assists, a steal and a half, 2.5 blocks, finished as an all NBA second team player, and an all defensive first team all defensive player, made an all-star team, and then finished fourth in defensive player of the year voting. And so you go from that season and you're thinking, you know what? Let's see what he does to build off of that season. And I thought, under JJ Redick and with a coach, that there were some whispers over the course of the season that he didn't always see eye to eye with JJ's approach to coaching the Lakers. But even given that, I thought he gave everything to and really devoted himself to the way that JJ wanted to play. Darvin Ham, I thought, did a really, really good job of making AD the centerpiece of what the Lakers were trying to do, or a one of the centerpieces of what the Lakers were trying to do. And then I thought JJ utilized some of those approaches, but then also tried to kind of balance out everybody's impact, and I think AD saw some of his individual impact go down a little bit offensively. Um, Never really became like I thought the Lakers looked their best when he was kind of the fulcrum of the offense. And if the Lakers played inside out basketball where he touched the ball either in the pick and roll or as a dribble handoff operator or in the pinch post, I thought that's when the Lakers looked their best. But the problem is, as the Lakers are wont to do, they tended to do that, look good, and then wander away from it. And I think of all of the players who really felt the brunt of the Lakers' inconsistent approach over the years, I think Anthony Davis was really the guy who suffered that the most because he requires somebody to get him the ball. And a lot of times guys just didn't. And then you add on top of that his predilection sometimes to uh, float when he wasn't getting the ball offensively. He wouldn't exactly demand the ball in the way that we were kind of used to with Shaq and with Kareem. But still, I thought he was a really, really special player for the Lakers this year. Got dinged up at the very end of his Lakers tenure, and then was eventually traded for Luka. So if somebody was to ask me, did AD live up to my expectations for him? I would probably say yes. I would say he did. Um, I really wish that the Lakers would have abided his wishes and brought in a better backup center so that he could have played a little bit more time at power forward and the Lakers would have been a little bit bigger just to get more of a look at it before the Lakers eventually traded him away. Um, AD basically spent the last few years of his Lakers tenure backed up by kind of a poopery platter of uh, veteran minimum contracts and veteran minimum swings in the dark that didn't really land. So I think the way that we're going to remember AD, and one of the ways that I'm going to remember AD, and we'll talk more about this here in a bit, but whether you think or I think or the stats say that AD was better at center versus power forward, he thought he was a power forward and he thought he was playing out of position. And yet he still continued to do it night in, night out at an extremely high level. So, yeah, I thought he did that again this year. Doesn't mean he was a perfect player. I think his limitations as a facilitator really lowered the Lakers' ceiling in those lineups where he was on the court and LeBron wasn't. And I think that will continue to kind of hinder his teams here moving forward. Is the offensive limitations setting a lower ceiling, and then his defensive acumen, which is special. And I thought when he got to Dallas and he got to play with capable centers again, that Dallas defense looked pretty suffocating again. Unfortunately, they all got hurt, and then he was just right back to playing center with no other backups behind him. But I think if you find a better balancing, or if you find a better balance than the Lakers did with AD these last few years of him playing center and power forward, and I think the final possession or the final percentages on it should probably be like 85-15%, where he plays center 85% of the time and then power forward 15% of the time. But the Lakers never found that balance with him, and I thought suffered as a result. So his season, just as far as a basketball season, pretty damn great. And then he gets traded for Luka Doncic, and that's probably how he'll be remembered here moving forward. But let's talk about the trade. So it's funny whenever people talk about the Luka trade, the focus still tends to be on the lack of draft assets that the Mavericks got for him. And I think that is pretty indicative of our somewhat I'm not going to say wrong infatuation, but it is an infatuation with draft assets and how valuable people perceive that to be compared to player value. And I think that is still kind of warped. That's the word I was looking for. I would say our warped infatuation with draft assets versus actual player return. And I think, if you would have gone back in time some 15, 20 years or so ago, and that Luka AD trade would have happened, I don't think it would be considered the worst trade of all time in the way that it is considered such now. Just ask the Pelicans, right? They got the big draft haul for Anthony Davis and didn't necessarily get the player value that Dallas did. And, Dallas now, obviously, they got super lucky, insanely lucky. And when they won the lottery just recently, but because they focused on player return and not draft asset return and then got lucky, they're very well positioned for next season if they can find a decent point guard to kind of fill in that gap at the beginning of the season while they wait for Kyrie Irving. But they're pretty well positioned to be pretty damn good next year, so long as guys get and stay healthy. And had they focused more on the draft asset aspect of this, Cooper Flag wouldn't be entering his rookie season in as great a situation he appears to be walking into. So, I do think that, like, the way that we talk about the Luka AD trade is kind of dumb in some ways. Even if, if I was looking for a player to trade Luka for, I maybe wouldn't have focused so heavily on a Anthony Davis at this stage of his career. Also, given what he's expected to make in his next contract, he might make upwards of like 70 million per year. Um, but still, like, if you're just saying basketball player for basketball player, the Luka AD swap, obviously Luka is a better basketball player, but AD is no slouch. So I think we're still kind of dumb in the way that we talk about that, because there is just so much value placed on draft assets and, the mystery box. Whereas the Mavericks said they wanted to trade for a boat. A lot of people talk about basketball and talk about sports, where, well, this mystery box could be a boat. So, yeah, I think the trade there is one that I will say there's a decent likelihood that both teams look back on it and think that uh, it worked out. Well, the Lakers, they need to win a championship with Luka. And then for Dallas and Dallas fans, they'll never say, "Yeah, that worked out great. That was a great trade." That's never going to be the case, and I don't expect that to ever be the case. But if Flag turns out okay and the Mavericks are competitive next season, that could be one of those situations where we look back on it and say, you know what? In hindsight, we should maybe start valuing actual player return a little bit more than the draft asset return. So the trade was obviously shocking. You guys remember the show that we did. You guys remember my infamous tweet where I was told that it was not a real thing, but it wound up being a real thing. Luka is a Laker. Anthony Davis is a Dallas Maverick. I'm hoping that because of Luke of Cooper Flag's presence there in the organization, because Dallas won that lottery, again, won that lottery, uh, that hopefully Mavericks fans can kind of move on to at least a certain extent and be more open to the idea of welcoming AD, because he is like he's a really good dude. Like I had precious few conversations with him, but really good dude. Everybody who you talk to say that he was one of, like, ask any beat reporter who had regular conversations with people close to the Lakers, and almost all of them, I would imagine, would come back and say, yeah, AD was probably my favorite interview. He's a really thoughtful guy. He's a really aware guy, very, very self-aware. And as such, I think takes things a little personally. And I hope that he's able to eventually feel a little bit more love from Dallas fans. And then, as we'll talk about here in a bit, we got to talk about kind of his standing within Lakers lore from here on out. I hope he feels the love from Lakers fans for winning them a championship, and again doing everything he can, even while he didn't necessarily agree with the way that he was being used. I thought he did a hell of a job given everything that was kind of going on. Now, as far as like his entire tenure with the Lakers, won one championship, got to a Western Conference final, multiple All-Star games, multiple first or second team award wins. Not winning an MVP and not winning a defensive player of the year. Defensive player of the year, I think, is more of a result of we just don't understand how to talk about defense. AD never really figuring into a MVP conversation ever as a Laker. This is a little disappointing because the hope when they traded for him was that eventually LeBron would be able to take a step back and operate kind of how he is now with Luka in tow, where he isn't necessarily the center of the universe and he can kind of get in where he fits in. That never happened with AD. And part of it, I think, is the personalities involved. I think Anthony Davis is a lot more. I have a hard time just calling him Anthony because I don't want to sound like I'm talking about myself in the third person, but AD is like he's almost a little too nice to be a team's superstar moving forward. That's why I think the Cooper Flag thing is really interesting, and the fact that he already has Kyrie there, and Kyrie is kind of the center of their universe, and that universe of flat earths that they have in Dallas. But still, I would have liked to seen what a Lakers season looked like with Anthony Davis figuring into the MVP conversation. I would imagine the Lakers wouldn't have been as mediocre as they were in most of those regular seasons. I would imagine that the Lakers would have been bigger and more physical. And we would have seen a little bit more growth from AD, the passer, but we never saw it. And I think that's part of why when you talk about the entirety of his tenure, I wouldn't obviously go so far as to call it a disappointment, but I also don't think it was the overwhelming success that people kind of thought that it would be going in. And look, a lot of this is because Lakers fans are really spoiled. Most organizations would say he won a championship and he made another Western Conference final. That should be enough, but that isn't enough for our standards. When you have one, let alone multiple superstars, the expectation is multiple championships. You have Showtime, where you had Magic and Kareem. You had the three-peat, when you had Kobe and Shaq. Then you had back-to-back when you had Kobe and Powell. And I think the Lakers probably would have had a better chance at going back-to-back if they didn't play the next season after their title 5 business days later. So that's context worth taking into account. That team got hurt and kind of stayed hurt. And then when they were kind of finally figuring it out, AD got hurt. And then the rest of the tenure was kind of marred by his injury there and the overreaction to the injuries that they suffered in that playoff run. But he did have his input on the Russell Westbrook trade that kind of sunk the franchise there for a bit. The way that we look at Anthony Davis here, I think had they had a more complete roster the year that they got to the Western Conference Finals, or had they not made the Russell Westbrook trade and not completely ditched the bigger, stronger, faster formula, based on how these bigger, stronger, faster teams are doing in these playoffs, there's a good chance that we would be having a conversation about LeBron and AD figuring into or comparing favorably to Kobe and Powell, or probably not Kobe and Shaq, probably definitely not the Kobe Magic or the Magic and Kareem combination, but they would have had a maybe bigger place in Lakers lore there than they do now. And it is kind of a bummer that we never got to see that again, and that the Lakers had kind of given up on LeBron and AD over the last couple of years. So overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the Anthony Davis experience. Again, he's still Avery's favorite player, and every time she sees the Lakers on TV, she asks how AD is doing, and she, when I told her, well, now he's on the Dallas Mavericks. Now she wants to go to Mavericks games to be able to see AD. So he is like just one of those good dudes who happens to be spectacularly talented and gifted at basketball. And I don't know if he ever made the absolute most of those talents over the course of his career, but I do think he's done pretty damn well for himself. And I think he did really damn well for the Lakers. All right. The final kind of bit, and then I'll dive into some of your guys' questions here as well. But how is he going to be remembered as a Laker? How is Anthony Davis going to be remembered as a Laker? I think, for one thing, anybody questioning whether or not he should have his jersey retired, you're freaking bananas. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. He was with the team for 7 years, won a championship, made multiple All-Star games, was a good citizen for the entirety of his time in LA, and it's not like I could see maybe the argument if AD like demanded a trade or left in free agency, and his departure was completely of his own accord or his own will, and things ended poorly, but they didn't. Like Anthony Davis won the Lakers a championship, got to another Western Conference Finals. Again, the All-Stars, the All-NBA, and the All Defensive awards that he got along the way. And then on top of it was a centerpiece of a trade that landed you your next franchise superstar. So to me, it's not even a question. The guy deserves his jersey to go up in the rafters whenever his career is finally over. And I wouldn't go so far as to give him a statue or anything like that, but a jersey retirement for sure. And to me, I think he'll go down as one of the most individually talented players to ever wear a Lakers uniform. I think he was an incredibly unselfish player, one of the more unselfish players, superstars in the history of the Lakers. Again, how you feel about Anthony Davis, how I feel about Anthony Davis, and whether he should see himself as a center, that is kind of neither here nor there, as he thinks he is a power forward, and he thinks the best path forward for any team is for him to be a power forward. And, the concerns over spacing matter, but the fact that, according to him, he was playing out of position, and he only ever really publicly complained about it the once, and as LeBron points out, was immediately shipped out. But, always pretty much just showed up for work, carried a bunch of just awful, abysmal defensive lineups and tried to make the best of them, while taking defense incredibly personally. I'm going to look back on Anthony Davis as, again, one of my favorite dudes that I've been able to cover. One of my favorite Lakers to ever wear the uniform. Good dude, which I think matters quite a bit. And I think he'll always be, especially as we get further and further and further down the line, he'll always be one of those guys that when he comes to Staples Center, or money laundering, or crypto.com arena, whenever he plays there, I think he'll get nice warm ovations from the crowd. He should. And then if he, whenever he retires, I hope he goes into the hall wearing a Lakers uniform. And I hope that he kind of sees himself as a Laker forever. And that's kind of how he looks back on his career, because I think he deserves to look at that himself and to be seen that way by Lakers fans from here on out. Again, he didn't choose to be traded for Luka, but he was. And the fact that he was traded for a guy who is now the reason that the Lakers are not completely screwed after LeBron leaves, I'm that's going to go on the plus side to Anthony Davis's career and his legacy here moving forward. All right, so I'm going to dive into some of your guys' comments here, see what you guys think. Charismatic character. Should the Lakers trade for a center, or can we sign 2 centers on the free agent market? I think we should get Clint Capella for sure. I think Capella might be a little overpriced for the Lakers. All the Lakers have is the mini mid-level, and I think Capella will probably get at least just shot north of that number. I would probably predict that Capella lands at about 9 mil, 7 to 9 mil a season. And I don't think that's what the Lakers will be able to offer. Let me just double check. 20, 25, 26 NBA mini mid level exception. Yeah, so taxpayer mid-level is going to be 5.7, and I think Capella will probably be worth a little bit more than 5.7. Same probably goes for Brook Lopez. But as far as like signing 2 centers, I think the Lakers, like this, I think is where the Lakers need to use most of their resources. You gotta sign probably 2 of them, unless you're re-signing Jackson, who I don't think the Lakers will re-sign. And I'm not sure Jackson is all that interested in playing for the Lakers moving forward because of the fact that he was just outright benched. But maybe, the Lakers bring Jackson back. Maybe the Lakers, don't trade Kleba and they see him as kind of more of a floor spacing center next season. And that is considered an addition compared to, the roster last year. I think that would be a bit of a bummer, because I think Maxi Kleba, the expiring salary, is a lot more valuable than Maxi Kleba, the basketball player, at this stage of his career. But I think the Lakers should use their taxpayer mid-level on a center. I think they should probably sign 1 or 2 veteran minimum type centers this summer. And if they don't do one of those 2 things, then you definitely have to trade for a center. And look, I think that's the likeliest outcome here. I think they trade for their starting center, and then they use the taxpayer mid-level to sign their backup center, and then go into next year quite a bit bigger than they did last year. That would be my hope in my prediction. Ooh. Gabe Rocks. AD was incredible for us. That's the truth. Injuries and bad roster management was the issue. Yep, I would agree. Dark Galaxy. Anthony, any truth to the rumors of AR to Dallas for Gafford and draft capital, or PJ Washington? Sham said Dallas is looking for a point guard, and AR has a good connection with AD. I would have to look to see what Sham's actually said in this regard. I would be pretty shocked if the Lakers traded AR. Now, it's a little different if Dallas is willing to include draft capital on top of Gafford. That changes the math a little bit. But I think if the Lakers are going to trade Reeves, they will probably be trading him for, again, here's what I'll say. If the Lakers trade Austin Reeves, it'll be the kind of trade that Rob Pelinka is immediately able to do a victory lap press tour for. Um, where he thanks Austin for everything that he did and tells the nice warm story of Austin Reeves, the Los Angeles Laker, the undrafted player who they found out of nowhere and were able to turn into this all-star acquisition that they bring in. And I just don't think that they would have that kind of pressure for Daniel Gafford or even Walker Kessler, as we talked about last night. So I would probably say if they make that if they trade Austin, it would have to be one in hell of a draft asset package that the Lakers would be able to immediately turn into the kind of player that they would want to trade Austin for in the first place. If some team is more focused on draft asset acquisition compared to player acquisition, which we just talked about at the top of the show. All right. My son is just kind of waking up, so we have about 5-10 minutes or so here. Let's answer another couple of questions, or maybe one more question. Rare Form writes, Lakers would have got further with a healthy AD and Max Christie. That's a fun hypothetical. To Rare Form's point, the Lakers were playing some damn good basketball at the time of the trade. Now they played some damn good basketball on the other side of the trade too. I All right, here's how I'll frame it. I think I agree because I think that roster was more complete and better put together for a playoff run right now this postseason. One place I'll push back on is that AD was hurt then and then never really got healthy again this summer, and the Lakers probably would have been screwed. So if you're taking injuries into account, that kind of hurts this point. But let's take injuries out of it, and I think that was a more balanced and complete roster than the one that Luka was traded onto. And look, that's kind of how it usually plays out when you trade for a star. Usually it takes a little while for you to balance out your roster and build a roster completely around that player. And it does kind of, it takes a little while. So I think the Lakers are better off long-term with Luka, obviously. I think the Lakers probably would have been a little bit better off if you don't take injuries into account. They probably would have been a little bit better off this year. But look, AD got hurt. AD was hurt at the time of the trade. And then he rushed back, I think, because of all the things that were said about him on the other side of the trade and got hurt and then was never healthy again for the rest of the season. Remember, he rushed back twice and I can't believe Dallas rushed him back that second time. But yeah, I think if he would have taken his time and gotten healthy and would have been healthy for a playoff run, I think the Lakers probably win their first round series. I don't think they would have had the same upside that I thought going into the postseason. But if they would have been on that same side of the bracket, they probably beat Minnesota because they would have had the size to match up with them and Max to be able to throw on Edwards. And then if Austin struggles in that series the way that he struggled in the series as the Lakers are currently constituted, that obviously changes the math there too. So need to factor that into account. But if the Lakers get by Minnesota, they were very well put together to beat either Houston or Golden State, I think. And then you go into a series with either Denver or OKC and probably lose there would be my guess. But to this commenter's point, that is further than the Lakers got now. So you have that. But again, all of that said, the Lakers are better situated here moving forward. A lot better situated than they would have been moving forward after the season, especially when you take into account that AD is going to get paid again north of $60 million in his next contract. All right. We'll do one more. Let's see. Alexander Garvin, this is a true statement for this year. Absolutely. May have even won a chip this year, depending on the trades if Luka wasn't there. However, better with Luka better with Luka for the future. So worth the risk. Yep. Let's see. Davis FC, whose Avi is Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is going to prove a lot of haters next year. Can't wait. You got to add wrong there. Like you gotta make sure you add that important word there. Anthony Davis going to prove a lot of haters right next year. How about that, mother bleepers? Like you got to make sure you include the proper adjective. All right. A little shorter show here today on obviously an off day. This is going to be a series that we go back to, that we dip back into, and occasionally also with the occasional guest we'll have this conversation. But I did want to start here with Anthony Davis because I truly, truly hope that he feels the love from Lakers fans from here on out, and that he's remembered properly. And you know, there every so often I'll come across arguments that immediately notify me that you don't know ball. And the people who were saying like, nope, Anthony Davis shouldn't have his jersey retired. Sorry, everybody. You just don't know ball. All right. That is going to do it, though. Have a great rest of your evening. Make somebody else's, and make sure you're subscribed and rating the show, hitting that like button. That stuff really helps the show. And yeah, until the next time you guys hear from me, which will be probably a little bit later tonight, I might do a lowdown depending on the outcomes of some of these basketball games that are played tonight. Yeah, I'm Anthony Irwin. Have a great rest of your day. Make somebody else's. We'll talk to you tomorrow.